My name's Duncan Green. I work for Oxfam most of the time and LSE sometime. I blog a lot, which means I actually learn a lot because I have to read enough to write 1,000 words on something like that every day. And I particularly like being asked to come to meetings where I don't know anything, I don't understand the issue, because then I have to read up about it a bit and have 1,000 words by the end of today. So you've done my blog for tomorrow, so thanks very much for that. People are talking about learning as a form of change. So changing ideas, changing behaviours. And so I started wondering what DFID's theory of change is, because DFID's very big on theories of change. So what's its theory of change when it talks about learning? I hope it doesn't have a very simplistic, linear thing that knowledge leads to learning, leads to changes of ideas, leads to changes of behaviours. That would be a very, very crude and linear theory of change about learning. So I just wanted to talk about other ways. And the point that I think when you start thinking about theories of change is, the place you look is the arrows. Okay? It's this leads to that. It's the arrow that you need to challenge. That's where the assumptions are. That's where the things are overlooked. So I was thinking about what kind of learning are we talking about? And I think in 2x2s because I'm a very crude person. And on my axes, when I was messing around this morning, I had how big is the piece of learning and how aligned is it with what DFID currently thinks. And I'm going to do something about the 4 quadrants, but not now because there's not time. But it's quite interesting because if it's small and aligned, no problem. Then your standard, good leadership, space to reflect, communications and all the rest of it works fine. But what if it's not in that quadrant? What if it's very big and aligned, in which case it's going to take resources away from other people, and then you're into interest groups and silos, and why do we have to spend so much time thinking about X? Because that means less time thinking about Y. Is it very small but completely against DFID's priors, in which case you can forget it? Or is it very big and against DFID's priors, in which case for me it gets interesting? So I just wanted to talk about one quadrant. What if you come up with some learning which goes against the grain of DFID's current thinking? What happens? And I think some thoughts on that. I really don't have time to do it. Okay, some thoughts on that. I think we need to think much more about unlearning. How do people unlearn bad stuff? As individuals or as institutions? And yeah, personally, I unlearn lots of things because I have lots of stupid ideas. And I unlearn them usually through, personally, nothing like failing, nothing like being humiliated in public, nothing like saying something really stupid, nothing like asking someone out and they say get lost. Those are the big moments in my learning trajectories. And so how do we make those productive for people so they learn from screw-ups and failures is one thing. As an institution, I think it's about critical junctures, burning platforms. When do institutions carry on until something goes wrong and then they suddenly become porous and open to new thinking? So what are the critical junctures in DFID? Yeah, we've got quite a few at the moment, one way or another. How does that affect the way people absorb knowledge or reject knowledge? So I think thinking of it in terms of that flow. The unlearning process is disruptive and painful, and people find it so, and institutions find it so. And what tends to happen is it'll happen at the margins. There'll be groups of people who start thinking that something needs to change. They've got evidence, they start with mass evidence and learning, and then they start finding each other, and they forming little coalitions, and starting to try and do development differently, in the words of one particular coalition, which is busily lobbying and doing advocacy and all the rest of it at the moment. And then the question is, how do institutions respond to these little coalitions? Do they reject them, like an antibody, or eat them up and stop them? Do they create an enabling environment? Do they give them a bit of rope? How does the institution respond to these little nuclei of dissent, essentially, or new thinking? And then the final point, because I'm sure I'm running out of time, is we are not in a post-truth world, but I think we are in a post-data world. I think one of the useful things about Trump and Brexit is that it's making me rethink what is truth for people. And I think truth for people is often not data. Truth for people is narratives, personal experience, sending senior people on immersions to see what is actually happening out there. There's a whole range of different ways that people learn, and we concentrate, for my money, too much on some of them and not enough on the others. So I think narratives, thinking about who the messenger of the learning is rather than the message, is crucial. CEOs listen to other CEOs, they don't listen to researchers. So thinking about who carries the message. Oxfam loves killer facts. I think killer facts are hugely limited, but they sure as hell get the headlines during Davos every year, so that's quite good. And there is a place for data, but it's quite limited, I think, in terms of the bigger picture on learning. People make up their minds and then look for the data too. Do you see one of the other things I used to do when I was at DFID was phone up ODI and say, we need some evidence for this policy position in 2 weeks, please can you send it over? So we did lots of policy-based evidence making. What does that mean for your learning journeys?